Hello, friends. Welcome to Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is the logistics of success, a mindset for unstoppable growth with my friend, Nick Klingensmith. How's it going, Nick?
Joe, I am outstanding. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. It's great to have you back on my podcast.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here again.
So, Nick, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
My name is Nick Klingensmith. My company is called Stride Motivation, and I am calling from Clearwater, Florida.
Very nice, very nice. So what do you and the Stride Motivation people do?
Stride Motivation is just that. It's motivation to hit your stride. I'm a full-time professional motivational speaker and a mental endurance and sales performance coach. And so I work with other logistics sales professionals who are lost, stuck, or unmotivated to help them clarify their priorities, align their goals, and then break them down into the wildly specific and stupidly simple action steps to drive success.
Yep. Nick, you come from the logistics business. We'll get a little bit more into your backstory, but you understand the logistics business. And I think that's important when we're talking about coaching in this business or sales training or speaking about this business, which you do at conferences. There's a lot of motivational speakers out there, and I'm sure they're all good. I'm never, ever going to put any of those down. I think a lot of us need that motivation, but I think it's really important that you come from this business.
Where it's given me the opportunity is help others who are going through things that I've experienced. And I had a really good career in the business and I wore a lot of different hats. And I will tell you, I think that the greatest thing to overcome for people in this business right now is the continued volatility. The days of having 10, 20-year tenures at one job are long since past for some of this younger generation. It's going to take some mental endurance to be in it and successful for the long haul.
Yep. And I think all industries have their unique challenges. We had during COVID this incredible spike in growth. And unfortunately, people died and we had all the problems with COVID, but the business was booming. And then after COVID, which basically the last 2 years, we've had challenges. And I think when you talk about those challenges, other industries have challenges, but people in logistics, transportation, in the supply chain space, on the provider side, we have had basically a recession. And wasn't really like the volumes were way down, but we had such a growth in the space that we needed some armies to leave the field. And when I say armies, people had to shed some trucks. Freight brokers, we have, I think, 5,000 fewer freight brokers than we did at the peak. And anybody who's selling technology to those companies, which is an increasingly large piece of the pie, really struggled also because no one wanted to spend any money.
There's the accordion-like effect of hire, implement tech, let's advertise, let's sponsor, let's expand. And then all of a sudden it's okay, no tech, lay everybody off, send everybody home, and we got to shrink back into this. And I mean, that is part of business, but I feel like there's so many companies that are just way too reactive out there. So they see one good economic sign and they're like, all right, let's invest, let's spend, let's do all this without thinking about the plan of how to make it work. Or one bad day and like, all right, clear out the shelves. We got to hold the money back. And everything's just so reactive.
Yeah, that's the challenge. So Nick, again, I mentioned you came from this business. Let's get your backstory quickly. Because I know I've interviewed you before, and I'll make sure I put a link to that episode in the show notes so people can hear your whole story in more in depth. But give us the short version. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you started Stride Motivation. And why did you start Stride?
I was born and raised on the island of Martha's Vineyard, serving coffee to the rich people. And I went to college at the University of Massachusetts out in Amherst, which was my safety school. I remember signing my thing saying I was going to go there, and it was like the saddest day of my life. And it turned out to be the best 4 years I ever had.
Where did you want to go?
No, I did not apply to Harvard. I was going to because my grandfather had gone there. It would have been a joke. But Boston College was my number one. Boston University was my number two. I don't even remember who 3 and 4 were. And then there was UMass. And got waitlisted at BC, couldn't afford BU. I don't think I really cared about number 3 and number 4. And UMass was an opportunity to just come back home. And I just had no idea that I needed those 4 years there. It was a perfect ecosystem for me. I took my school very seriously. I studied law and history, which clearly I'm using every day now. I worked full time in school, and UMass was like a city by itself. So I grew up a lot in those 4 years. And though I grew up fairly independent and working at a young age, I was really equipped to go hit the streets when I graduated. And so I started in telecom. I started in sales right after school. I spent 5 years of telecom sales, B2B, selling voice and internet services to business. And this was at a time where voice over IP was witchcraft, and iPhone had not yet been discussed. And the concept of using the internet over the air was like, wait, what? So then I moved to Florida. Actually, it'll be 20 years in October that I moved to Florida, and I started working for a small shipping franchise that later became known as a company called Blue Grace Logistics.
Oh, wow. So you were there early.
I was the seventh employee, and I had met with the CEO. Who was hiring for salespeople, and I was really just attracted to his vision, and I was just drawn to the energy and the type of B2B sale that it was for me at the time, especially reselling DHL and LTL services more in a tech platform. It was an easy transition for me. It was a consultative sale. I'm an activity warrior. Banging doors is easy for me. And so it was a natural transition. But a lot of founders have these visions of explosive growth for their company, but that's all Bobby ever talked about. And that's the ride I was in for. And so for the 14 years I was there, I ultimately was elevated to the position of VP. I built the recruiting teams, the training teams, the inside sales teams, the truckload sales team. My career was really just building and leading teams, which up until about 2019, they really had the foundation for the company that they needed at that point. They got private equity. The company is going through a lot of expansion, great company, but it just wasn't going to be the right fit for me anymore. And so I left, and I spent a couple of years where I did some consulting, again, built some other teams in the industry, ultimately went back to work for 3PL for about 2 years. And this is going to segue into Sheer because it was a really good job that I had, but I was wildly not passionate about it anymore. And the reason being is because I had just published my book, Through the Fire. Now, as we talked about before, I'm a 4-time cancer survivor. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I have 7 herniated discs from 2 different rollover fatality car accidents, nerve damage, sleep apnea. I'm forgetting a few things. And in the last
Cancer.
I said that one, 4-time cancer survivor.
Okay. All right. Yeah. You've had a lot of challenges, some maybe self-inflicted, but the cancer and some of these things just bad luck of the draw. You've made those challenges your story and you've overcome them. And that's why I think we talked for a long time yesterday, and we talked before we hit record this morning. And I just think that your story of overcoming these challenges, and it also doesn't always paint you in the best light, but you own that now. You go, yeah, okay, yeah, I screwed up. I was an idiot. I did some things I'm not proud of. But also you look and go, if I hadn't done those things, maybe I'm not where I'm at today. And I think that's very authentic. That's an overused term these days, but you are who you are, and you're not putting a facade on who you are anymore.
If I had, I wouldn't have anything to help others with today, because a speaker who goes up and lies about himself is an entertainer. A coach who, for me to coach people without being vulnerable, without being authentic. And you know what? It may be an overused word, but it is not an overused trait, because we don't see a lot of it these days. And I say this all the time. Just because you have had bad things happen to you does not make you tough, right? You're still alive. You're a survivor. Cool. But to get out of the victim mindset, to overcome these issues, we actually have to do something with it.
Yeah, that is so true, Nick. And one of the things we all get sucked into the social media stuff. And I think some of the stuff that is pushed to me through social media is there to get me riled up. And one of the things that I think about is, and we've all seen it, is people say, I have anxiety, I'm neurodivergent, I'm this. And by the way, I feel bad for anyone who has all those things going on, but they keep describing all of the things that befall them. And it's not saying, yet I've overcome those. It's more or less like, this is why I'm special. And I'm like, having anxiety, I think we all have it to some extent, but all of a sudden making it who you are, you're like, no. And you you're a cancer survivor. You have diabetes. You've done some stupid stuff with your life with alcohol.
Can I interject something?
You don't look and say, yeah, I'm a victim. I know you're like, I am using those obstacles to grow.
Because the rest of the sentence is, I'm the 4-time cancer survivor, type 1 diabetic and recovering alcoholic who became an obstacle course racer and defied it all. When I define myself by my cancer, when I define myself by my diabetes, and let me put this in the context that other people can understand too, right? Looking back at even my time in leadership, when I describe myself as, oh, I was a frustrated leader or an edgy leader, oh, I was stressed out all the time and blah, 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 or any of those things, those are just excuses. I'm living in it. I am justifying why I could not improve. Hey, I was really frustrated and edgy leader, and that's why I was short with people. No, I was short with people because I was afraid of my ego getting damaged, of not getting my way, of being wrong, of being whatever. Like, it was fear that was driving that sort of reactive dog behavior towards other people. And if I accept it and I voice it and I understand it, not only can I then learn how to stop doing that behavior, but if I can help just one person, just one time, be like, you know what? Maybe I'm the problem and maybe I don't need to react this way today. That's how I overcome it.
Yeah, that's Nick. It's funny because we were talking about drinking the other day, yesterday, I think. Maybe it was the last time I talked to you. I forget, but I was just talking to some friends about this. I went to a funeral and some other things, and I saw some buddies who I normally would have some drinks with. But I've been trying to be a little healthier and trying not to. I'm like, I don't need to have a few drinks to enjoy my friends. I grew up with these guys, and it reminded me, I saw I think it was Josh Brolin. He's an actor. And I remember him saying, I can't drink anymore. I don't know how to manage myself. And I remember him saying, but I love the camaraderie of drinking. I love the fellowship. I love being one of the guys. And it occurred to me that you don't want to let that go. And sometimes, and I think about our industry, when I go to a conference, old friends, you're like, hey, let's have a few drinks. Let's go out. Where are we going? We're going here. And I always think not to be part of all that feels like, oh, I don't want to do that. I got to be one of the guys. And yet there's more and more people are like, and by the way, I'm not against drinking. If you can go have a few drinks and enjoy yourself, go ahead. if it's a problem, don't do it. but you've had to overcome that. And that's leaving a life behind. Because I can see how, when I was hearing Josh Brolin say it, it occurred to me, yeah, it's not just I don't drink. It's no, I don't do a lot of the stuff that's associated with it. And it was a part of me. I wanted to be a pirate. I wanted to be a swashbuckler with the rest of the fellas.
Here's something I had to accept, that I didn't like most of the things I thought I liked. I just liked drinking. A lot of the events that I would go to with the guys, I don't care about those events. I just liked drinking, because now that I don't want to go there, like, I can go anywhere. I'm not afraid to be around alcohol. I can buy rounds. I can socialize. Like, I'm fortunate. I'm spiritually fit to be in that place, but I still don't do a lot of these things because I'm like, this just isn't fun for me. And it did take a little bit of acceptance to realize, okay, it's okay that I don't like these things anymore. But also, I'll tell you something else. My second or third year sober, I remember it was when I was at Blue Grace, and we had just sold one of our conferences, and I think I stumbled down to the lobby bar. I don't know, it was probably 11:30. And I expected the place to be booming because that's how I always remembered it. Man, there was 3 people sitting at the bar. You could barely see them. It was so dark and quiet in there. And I bet in their minds, they thought the place was booming. And so when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when I remember having just a meaningful conversation outside that bar with a friend of mine, and then I went upstairs and went to bed. But I remember, if I was still in my drinking days, I would have found a way to make it a story. And that usually wasn't going to be a good one.
Yeah, there's that old saying is, no good stories start with, I had a salad. All the fun stories seem to start with, I was out with the guys and we had a few drinks.
We'll tell you what, nobody's ever woke up the next day and said, man, I wish I drank until last night. Exactly. So finding that divide is hard. And there is something to be said. I do miss the bachelor party mentality where you're with 20 other guys. You're all just celebrating, hooting, hollering. You don't even know why. Alcohol lowers those inhibitions and makes it easier, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah, and I always say the camaraderie sometimes is you're like, "Oh, yeah, this guy's my best friend." You're like, "You're never gonna see him t ever again. You met him at the bar an hour ago, and he cheers for the same team you do."
Well, not for nothing, guys of I'm gonna say our age, just meaning over 40. If I see one of my best
Way
friends,
over 40 over my case.
nobody must know. If I see one of my best friends and we're out drinking together, man, it might be the last time I see that guy. They might live in another state. It might be 20 years. And do I really want to be the last time I see them sometime I barely remember?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm more about the meaningful time now.
Yes, I appreciate that. Anyway, I'm glad I'm talking to you today, and I wanna talk to you today because it is the new year. We're talking on January 9th, and I hope to publish this today on January 9th. And yesterday when we were talking about business, I was talking about some of my goals for the year. You were talking about some of your goals for the year. And one of the things that kind of came up from that conversation, and I think you pointed it out, is we all have goals that we start in the new year. I set quarterly goals for myself, my team. And but in the beginning of the year, we have these high hopes. And I think a lot of times it's like, hey, we're going to triple sales, we're going to double sales, we're going to increase sales this way, we're going to fix operations throughput, and we're going to improve our income. We want more and more. And I think some of the challenge in some of this is that if I'm going to double sales, then I'm going to have twice as many sales guys, or are these guys just going to become supermen all of a sudden? What is changing? And I think in a lot of times, it's just we hope to push harder. We're going to grind more. We're going to do this. And I don't think I can speak for my own self after 1,000 years of working, is a lot of times it doesn't work. We don't hit those high goals because we really didn't plan on hitting those high goals. We just thought we were going to work harder somehow. And I was going to do incremental things, but somehow transform my business. So I'll leave it to you. Tell us what we need to do as we hit the new year so we can actually meet some of the goals that we're setting for ourselves.
First, I want to point out that I say this all the time. I do not believe in the magical flip of a calendar. All right. Just because it's January 1st does not mean that anything is new. If we want new goals in the new year, we need to take a new approach to our new goals. And the first thing that happens, the first thing we need to do is let go of everything that happened before. We need to accept the fact that we might have come up short. We need to own our previous shortcomings. We need to let go of our previous disappointments, our frustrations, our resentments, anything that holds us back from running faster, from running lighter into the new year are things that we simply need to let go of, including expectations. And that's not just a bad thing. I don't just mean letting go of bad expectations. I also mean to let go of the expectations that you had of yourself, period. And the reason I say that is because I don't think we ratchet up the goals and expectations enough. I think that we play small ball too often. We're afraid of what we don't know. We're afraid of how to set goals that we don't know how we're going to accomplish. We have no problem saying, hey, we're going to double goals, but who really personally commits themselves to a larger goal when they failed the year before? I think we need to defy our limiting beliefs by setting goals that force us to step outside beyond our comfort zone. If we're comfortable saying, hey, we're just going to work harder this year, then it's a crappy goal. We need to set a goal that's going to force us to make changes. Me, I'm an activity warrior, okay? When my default is to grind. When I don't have a workout to do, I just run. When I don't have a specific meeting or a specific task or something I'm trying to do, I just prospect. But no matter what, there comes a point where you're going nowhere fast. So for me, I've done a lot of personal branding last year. I've done a lot of the grinding. I pursued various things, but right now I'm going to be far more targeted. And that's where my approach to my goals this year is going to be different than in previous years.
So with your clients, are you setting, you said you don't believe in the magical flip of the calendar, and I agree with you. I like to set quarterly goals. And the reason I say it is it's 12 or 13 weeks and it's contained. And I'm also, this is what I struggle with. When we're talking about sales, I could say, hey, I'm going to sell and I could come up with a dollar amount. And that makes some sense. But sometimes I think about when I just go into the gym. I told you this. I like to just say, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week, plain and simple. That's how it's going to be. I don't necessarily say I'm going to lose this much weight or bench press this much. As I have to be there because the activity is what's going to get me there, not writing it down. Do you set like how do you set your goals? And then do you set quarterly goals or are you setting yearly goals with your customers?
I could go on this topic all day, but I'll focus on specifically on the work goals. So I had to pick a number out of a hat. I've been at this for 14 months. I don't have a lot of experience in terms of what can I expect to make. Now, because I've been creating comp plans and forecasts and budgets and sales for the better part of 2 decades, I do have a bit of a process. So I set a goal for the year and then I break it down and I reverse engineer it. So I said, hey, I need to make X this year. I then break that down by quarter. And I'm just applying a logic matrix, right? I'm not going to earn 25% every quarter, right? I'm starting at zero.
Is that the process you're using with your customers too, your clients?
Yeah, then because the next thing we do is when we break it down to monthly. But then here's the thing, and let's just say I'm working with a logistics rep right now or somebody who has a goal that they have to hit for the year. Same thing, we'll break it down to be as simple as we can, break it down to the month we're in, but then we have to look and say, where are we now? What's in your pipeline? So if I need to generate, and I'm going to make up numbers here, okay? $20,000 of revenue needs to be in my pipeline, or I'm sorry, if I need to close $20,000, that means I need $60,000 in my pipeline. And then I can focus on that. And then I turn very specific objective-based activities on how do I generate that revenue in my pipeline right now. I don't think about the end year goal. I think about how do I achieve the January goal, and which, by the way, I already have. So now I get to say, how do I achieve the February goal and begin to break that down? Because it always does. And this is the thing I do for my clients is I break it down to the wildly specific and stupidly simple action steps. So what type of customers do you need to pursue? What do they look like? And what are the activities required to find them?
Yeah. Nick, I've been working with you a little bit on this stuff for my business. And what I like about this whole idea of particularly care, I set quarterly goals rather than the yearly, but it still works out the same way because I know what I expect this year. But what I think is also great about coaching, I also have my coach and home, and having a coach like you is you're like an accountability partner. I think so often we need that accountability partner. And I think if you can get somebody from your work, maybe you have a boss that boss is maybe the accountability partner, but you need that. And I think it also forces you to vocalize what the plan is in a way that's a little, as soon as you start saying, my plan is I'm going to sell twice as much as last year. What are you doing differently? I'll be selling twice as much as last year. And as soon as you say it out loud, you realize I need to add a little bit of meat to the bones on this plan.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different levers that you can pull, especially if you're in and around the transportation industry. What does your ideal client look like? And if you pay attention on LinkedIn, there's this revolt against KPIs and cold calls and definitions. And I just don't understand that logic because I don't want to play lottery. I want to sell effectively. And so when I look at what my ideal client profile looks like, maybe I have to make too many calls to land them. So in other words, I then need to pick a different client profile, or maybe I need to ratchet it up. Maybe it's okay if I make 1,000 calls for one client because I only need 5 clients. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you could lower your GP per shipment to get more volume, or maybe you raise it because you just need better
What is GP?
gross profit, margins, gross profit, whatever the various levers that you pull are how you refine, how you approach your goal. More of the same is not going to get you more.
No, that's just what you did last year, but and doing a little more of what you did last year and saying we're going to grind, we're going to push. None of that is actually leverage. And that's the next point I want to talk to you about is there are all sorts of, use the term levers, that we can use now that we traditionally wouldn't call part of sales. And some of this overlaps into marketing or go to market. And I think the world has changed a lot in the sales world since social media and all the other stuff. And I'm going to talk about some of these one-to-many things. The first one I'll talk about, because we're doing a podcast right now. Lots of podcasts out there. And the reason people do them is because they work. I have people come on my podcast because people want to I always say the same thing. When you come on my podcast, Nick, my goal, and your goal too, is I want my audience to get to know and trust you. I also want my audience to think of you as an expert. You are an expert. But that's my goal always on these podcasts. And I always think, who do I want to work with? I want to work with people I know and trust, people I relate to on some level. And then I want to work with experts, people who are experts in the problem I have. And I keep thinking, that's why podcasts are out there. But what's also great about podcasts is it's a one-to-many. And they can hear your voice, they can see your face because it's video. And I think these kind of tools, whether you call them sales or marketing, doesn't matter anymore. If you're a salesperson, you need to be taking advantage of this medium. And it's not, again, I'm calling it podcasting in general, but it could be, we're just making some videos of what we do. Not so long ago, a software company reached out to me and they said, sign up for a demo, blah, blah, blah. I sign up. It takes me directly to a page and it's the founder and it's an 8-minute video. And I watch it and I thought, oh, okay, this is interesting. This is the demo. He's giving me a demo, but he's obviously doing a one-to-many. And I keep thinking, do I mind? No, I'm doing this on my own time. I don't have to schedule a meeting. It's 8 minutes. I don't have to talk to him for 40 minutes. Does that work? Is that sales?
So if anybody who used to work for me is listening to this, they're going to think I'm under duress, all right, with what I'm about to say. Because, yeah, I stood behind people with a whip and said dial. And I hated email. If you sent one of those stupid ass emails with a meme, I would have lit you up. I encouraged social media interaction and engagement where appropriate. So I don't want to touch too much on that one, but really for me, it was very traditional. And in the last couple of years, I went from, and especially 22, 23, when I was still in sales in that business, it was phone calls, emails to everybody. I would have never spoken to anybody who did not have sign-off authority, all right? And instead, it was send an email to anybody in the company who would talk to me to give me information. LinkedIn to everybody, Twitter to everybody, Facebook to everybody. Because Facebook, Meta, and Threads and all that were one, a lot of the profiles have been forced to be open profiles. So it's actually easier to engage with people on other platforms. But now by the way, handwritten letters, going old school, still highly effective. Risk versus rewards, you're sending out 100 letters, maybe one person out of those 100 takes your call after the fact or responds in some way or fashion. So the way though now, and by the way, I'm talking specifically about new business acquisition, because I know there's a lot of, I'm going to say brokers or people who've got their business who are just happy maintaining it. But if you want new business, the thing that it all comes down to today, we call it personal branding, we call it expert, we call it one-to-many, but you have to be credible. You have to be a real person. Whether it be having your own podcast, guesting on podcasts, there's a degree of credibility that you get there, whether it be featured in blogs, writing your own blogs, how you interact with people. Not for nothing, I can get credibility by simply sharing your content to other people in the industry. It's what is the value that you're sharing and how are you separating yourself as an expert? Because at the end of the day, these days in particular, people will look you up the very moment you try to hit them up. They need to see that you're a real person, not an AI. And they need to see that, why are you the expert? Why will I let you do surgery on me?
And Nick, it's interesting because I'm thinking of a friend of mine who's wildly successful. Hasn't updated his LinkedIn to his new job even. And when I point that out, I used to point it out to him. Now he's so successful, I feel stupid even saying anything to him. But there are a lot of people who are creating video content and sharing it, and they're creating audio content like this. And again, podcasts now are audio and video, but more people are involved in the sales on the customer side. It used to be, I got to call one guy, especially if you're selling technology, but increasingly if you're selling to a larger company, there is a team. So it's not just the guy on the dock. It could be the guy on the dock, the head of supply chain. It could also be the finance person, and maybe the owner's involved. Kara Smith-Brown from Lead Coverage, I will call her a flat out expert in this business. She said that those teams are growing. So the idea that you just reach out to one guy, nope, not going to happen anymore. And then also when you're trying to get all those people in the same room, could be a long time away. So the idea of sending video out or audio out or sending an email, and I'm going to use two terms here. Email marketing, that is the sending to a whole bunch of people who subscribe to your list. That is email marketing. But there's also the email reach out that we're doing, sales guys do. And I think we have turned the corner on this, where most people prefer you send them an email rather than call them. And since we're all on mobile phones, we don't answer the people who call us. By the way, you remember the olden days when there was phones on the wall or phones on your desk. And if Satan was calling, you were obligated to pick that phone up. There was no such thing as, we didn't have caller ID all the time. People picked up the phone. Anyone who's got grandparents or parents in their lives, you will notice that they think it's a sin not to answer the phone.
Crazy, because I rarely answer the phone.
Yeah, anybody in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't have to answer the phone. I don't recognize the number. So cold calling on that is increasingly difficult. And by the way, I always say, if I'm buying a new car, I don't wait around for a call from a dealership. I don't wait around for a phone call. I'm not driving from dealership to dealership. I'm going to start online. And so the idea that we shy away from online is silly, and well, nobody's doing that. But I always say, people who are going to make a change with maybe buy a new TMS, maybe get a new freight broker in the mix, find a new carrier, they are putzing around on LinkedIn looking for the person they're going to pick years before. They might be connected. And so the idea that you don't create some content, and again, salespeople might in the past, that's not my job, that's marketing's job. I think increasingly it is falling to the sales guy to create some content, maybe with the marketing team or the go-to-market team.
Let's also look at something that's happened in the last 5 years. Leading into 2020 or even 2019, right? Like, I probably could have named off every brokerage out there. Now I can't name off every brokerage in Clearwater. And a lot of that, when you get Nick Klingensmith Logistics and NJK Transportation and every independent agent out there, there's the fragmented market has become increasingly fragmented. So it's one thing if you've got somebody working at a Blue Grace or Robinson or a Global Trans, or people who have a vision and a mission and marketing plans and theoretically a strategy behind it. And a lot of those reps are flying under that flag. But now let's look at NJK Logistics, where there's 3 of us. We don't have any of those things. So there's a lot more of those now where people made some money or went off on their own, and they have to create that for themselves. And so a lot of them are struggling because they like their niche. And I get this. People don't want to beat their chest. This was very hard for me to get over doing what I'm doing. But how can I say I'm a speaker and, hey, I'm going to be good at it, and hey, I'm going to talk about things that resonate with you, if I don't simply put content out there? I have to be okay with the fact that, you know what? I help people. I can help people. I can be okay doing this. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that I think, especially the individuals, the small brokerage houses, really need to engage some of those things.
Yep. And by the way, it's also challenging for companies, because if I'm working for you, Nick, and you're a large freight broker, a large technology company, or even a small one, the idea that Joe is creating content is a little scary, because I'm afraid he's going to do something a little outlandish, something that is off brand. And so I think you have to make sure whatever you're creating content-wise aligns with the messaging of the company, and you're not going to do anything. And some companies don't care if you say you start swearing on the podcast. Others do. And so you just have to make sure you're on brand and aligned to whatever the messaging of the company. But the second point we're talking about here is use leverage. So again, you can't do more of the same and expect great results in the new year. So potentially take advantage of some of these levers out there, which can give you this one-to-many, which is, again, podcasting, email marketing, maybe work with your marketing team on that, creating content, whether it's articles or webinars, videos, using social media. We talked a little bit about that. One other thing I'm going to talk about, and we talked about it a little bit earlier today, is intent data. Kara Smith Brown from Lead Coverage, she was just on my podcast not so long ago, and she wrote a book called The Revenue Engine, and it's fantastic. I bought a copy, or the audio version. I'm listening to it, but she also sent me a copy of the book. By the way, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I think she's still giving out free copies, and she's from this business. She's had success with a lot of people in this business, and she said the future of sales is intent data. And intent data is basically people who are looking. And when I have a website, I get, let's just say 1,000 people come to the website in a day. A couple will reach out and say, "Hi, Joe. Hi, the logistics of logistics. Interested in what you do." The vast majority just come, look at an article, and leave. But increasingly, we know who's on our websites, and that's what intent data is. And so if you have somebody who's on your contact us page 30 times over the last 60 days, and they keep looking at certain things on your page that give you the impression these are people who are interested, we can get their name and email and their phone number. Those are the people we should be reaching out to. So I am, when Karen says it, I believe her because, again, she's had wild success. And even though lead coverage in the past, you might have called them a marketing company, they call themselves go-to-market. And I think they call themselves that because they recognize that a lot of people look at marketing as, well, we'll create content, the sleepy people who are in the sales, underneath the sales VP. Not anymore. The marketing, if you can give me intent data, that is the most important person in my business. At that point, that is more important than my top sales guy. Because if you can give me that, tell me who's coming onto my website, you're God. You're the sales God. And I think we need to take advantage of some of these technologies, these levers.
I think there's 2 points to follow up on this with. Number one, 100% about the niching, right? Like the more we keep talking about one to many, but when you don't know your niche, you need to discover your one-to-one. Who's the one person who has the problem that you can solve the best, and then go find others like them. And so that's what we're intent, right? Because that's also the person who is most likely to adopt your product or services. So when we get that intent, we move so much faster. Number two, we were talking about leverage. What else can we outsource? All right. If I had, trust me, there will be a point where my cash flow is hitting me where I'm gonna reach out and be like, Joe, can I get her number? Does she do stuff like this for me too? Because I'll have enough data to be like, who are my most likely targets? And I want to outsource that so I don't have to spend any time talking to the wrong people. You mentioned email marketing, right? When I was promoting my book back in July, I sent out a few hundred emails, which isn't that big a deal for some, but I did it all manually because I was not leveraging a technology for automated email. Our mutual friend helped with automating some LinkedIn outreach. Rather than spending 4 hours a day to generate 4 appointments a week, my calendar has been full for months. And there's nothing disingenuous about that. It's my message reaching out to people that I want to talk to. So there's a lot of ways that we could outsource or leverage technologies to help us move faster.
And when I say one to many, I still mean we'll get into, you do need a niche. I always say, if you have to send in 100 emails today or make 100 phone calls today, just don't make them scattershot. If you specialize in cold chain, focus in on just cold chain people. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is, the first thing we talked about is the goals for this year. And again, don't have expectations that you're going to kill it this year with incremental improvements. You have to set some big goals. By the way, if you don't set big goals, I always feel like you don't set big goals. It doesn't force any change in your behavior.
It's not exciting enough to get after it.
Right. And so then we talk about leverage. Leverage these one to many. There's so much technology that allows us to, again, basically be a sales guy on steroids. And then the next thing I want to talk about is personal branding, because creating content, if you're not an expert, or creating content that is generic, isn't good. So personal branding and becoming an expert, talk a little bit about that and why that's so important today.
I'm gonna cite LinkedIn in particular because for anybody listening right now, pull up your own page and look at the activity box. And what are the first 3 things that it says there? If it says anybody who's looking at your profile has already moved on, who are you? Are you a real person? Are you a bot? Are you just a marketing engine for the company you work for? You have to show us that you're a real human being. I don't care if that means that you have to show a Christmas card with your family, or you don't always have to put deep thoughts about some personal experience, but something. Talk about something you're interested in. Post once in a while. I had a client who was struggling with this, and I was like, dude, you love hockey, right? He's like, yes. I go, post about hockey tonight. His post blew up. It just let people know in his network, hey, here's something I'm interested in. And I know that might seem like a small thing, but if we were at a networking event together, we're not talking about logistics. We're going to talk about the mutual interest and get to know one another. So I don't think people do enough of that online. So I push that. That said, you have to have an opinion on something in your own industry or business. You don't actually have to be the expert, but to start positioning yourself as an expert, pick a topic, learn about it, and beat it to death. Share your thoughts.
Before I was a podcaster, I was a blogger, and I was a blogger for a long time. And when you write about stuff, you become more expert at it. And so for me, I would write about certain things. And one of the things I wrote about a lot was how to select a 3PL. And I always remember writing an article, and then I decided I'm going to do a webinar on how to select a 3PL. And by the way, I was at a 3PL. So when I did that webinar, I played it straight. I said exactly what I had, the 10 or 12 things that I would do if I was looking for a 3PL. And my first webinar I did, I think 38 people signed up and 8 showed up. And I was like, 6 of these guys I know compete against me, which is fine. That's the nature of creating content. And 2 of the people, I thought maybe they're shippers. Who knows? And anyway, I did that webinar. Afterwards, I got an email from one of the shippers in it and saying, Joe, I love the webinar. Thank you so much. Could you share your PowerPoint with me? And I'd like to talk to you about maybe you guys could help us out with our service. Now, they moved food and we didn't do food. But this person sent me this long, impassioned email complaining about their current 3PL and why they needed a new 3PL. I didn't get the business, but it did wake me up to the fact that when you do a webinar, that stuff like that can happen. Anyway, I put that webinar up on YouTube. This is 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. It was probably 12, 13 years ago. Now I think about it. It was a long time ago. And I forgot about it. And then a few years later, somebody reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to speak at our conference about how to select a 3PL? And I always think like just this little webinar that 8 people actually attended, I got to speak at a webinar because of it. I got to speak at a conference because of it. And by the way, they paid me to come to that one. I was like, hallelujah. But I continued to write about that because I always used to think I'm looking for people who want a new 3PL. So I wrote a ton of articles about how to select a 3PL. And if you're doing cold chain, write about cold chain, become an expert in it. Not just a guy who sells it. I always say, nobody's looking for a sales guy. They're looking for an expert. I'm looking for an expert who I know and trust. That's it. I'm not looking. I would like to avoid conversations with salespeople. If I'm a cold chain guy looking for a new solution, I don't really care about the sales guy. I care about somebody being an expert. And ideally, I know and trust them.
And here's a thought on that too, which I think most of the people that we're talking about here, guys, you got 25 to 30 more years of this. It takes time. And I think a lot of people abandon that because transactions are easier and they're right in front of them. But that's again, that gets you to that more of the same part. And if we want to level up, you got to start becoming an expert in something. It doesn't happen overnight. What is it? 10,000 hours according to whatever, but let's just start with the first hour. Let's start with the first minute. Let's pick one topic that you can lean into and just be the barstool salesman. Share your perspective about it. You don't have to be you don't have to sound like a professor with a stick up your butt, but if there's a topic you can learn about that will help others, be that person for them.
It's interesting because I do think a lot of people who are listening might say, hey, that's all great. I don't have my boss is not expecting to walk over to my cubicle and see me writing articles. Honestly, a lot of that stuff has to be after hours. And I think if you're going to be successful, you have to put that effort in. When I wrote a lot of articles, I wrote them in my head. I would take a few notes here and there during the day, but it couldn't be instead of the day-to-day work. You want to be successful, you're going to have to sit down and write a little bit after hours, create some of that content when you can. It's not instead of sending out the calls or making calls.
And I think a consistent action is more impactful than a perfect action. So if you write for 5 minutes a night and write and publish one thing a week, even if it's just okay, that's how you start.
Yeah. The things you do every day are more important than the things you do every once in a while. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is just the blocking and tackling, the fundamentals of this business, the sales business. So walk us through that. You have five points, and I don't think anyone listening will go, "Oh, these are all revolutionary." This is the blocking and tackling of our business, but I think you have an interesting take on it. So walk us through those. Number one.
So just even to say before that, because we did just talk about all the bells and whistles that are out there and how we need to make sure we're taking advantage of things. However, if we focus too much on all the bells and whistles and all the shiny objects and all the tech, we're going to forget about the foundation and the fundamentals. And that's what we're talking about now is what are the blocking and tackling, the fundamentals in sales. I hope that everything I say right now, everyone says, yeah, I know that already, because it's the blocking and tackling. But I'm going to get specific. And number one is about properly identifying a prospect. You will not grow faster by being all things to all people. You need to know who your target client is, what it looks like, and how to engage them. If I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm specifically looking for logistics sales professionals who are lost, stuck, or unmotivated. I work with people in insurance. I work with an analyst for IBM. All right. I work with a single mom, but the target market that my identified prospect is. And so that comes from whether it be, if we're in transportation, that might be as simple as, do they ship product? All right. We don't need a lot of criteria. You just want to make sure that you're talking to people who have the opportunity to buy from you. So that's number one. Number two, and this typically might be a first prospecting conversation. This might be with somebody a little bit more experienced in the organization, but to actually qualify our prospect. Before the show, I gave you an example. If I'm the expert in heavy haul and I'm pursuing a heavy haul client and I talk to you, you're a transportation manager at this company, you have a big spend, and you tell me that almost 99% of what you ship is LTL on pallet rates, that's the end of the conversation. You're not a qualified prospect for me. When you call somebody and you try to sell them something and they're like, hey, that's great, but corporate in Germany is the one who makes the decisions and pay the bills, that's no longer a qualified prospect for you. If I'm talking to a potential coaching client, they're like, Nick, this all sounds great, but I don't have any money. That's not a qualified prospect for me. So qualify them to make sure that they can buy from you and that they are likely to be able to adopt your products and services based on what your client profile is.
Yeah. So we need to identify that prospect, and it's going to be the right kind of company. It's going to be also the right person. So talking to a low-level person who doesn't actually have the ability to make the decision. By the way, that's always sometimes the difficult part is when you're talking to someone who's involved in, but not the final decision maker. So sometimes you have to say something along the lines of, hey, Nick, who else besides you makes the final decision on this?
There's a way I preempt that too.
Who else helps you out on this thing?
One way to preempt that a little bit is when you're talking to that person, don't ask them buying questions. Their opinion doesn't matter. I just want to know how things work. Ask how does this, how much of this, how often does this? When we start empowering the non-decision maker, they become the decision maker and we're stuck.
Yeah, I have a buddy who says, never take no from someone who can't say yes.
Yep, 100%. And it's tricky because then you can make an enemy in an organization real fast before you can make a friend.
And I think it's also important to recognize that we are pretty much, the way most companies are working these days is, if I have a couple people who are working with me and I'm picking a technology and they're going to be using it, I'm going to get them involved. And so they might not be the final decision maker, but they have influence over it. So it's important that we recognize who's influencing versus who is making the final call, but you have to win them all over.
And that's actually where discovery comes into play, number 3, because a real thorough needs investigation, you can't ask these questions to somebody who doesn't have the answers. It has to be somebody involved. And so this is where we just simply need to ask more questions and peel back the onion. This isn't a how much question. This is a why. An effective discovery call should be like a 4-year-old standing in the grocery line asking why I can't have a candy bar over and over again until we get an answer that we understand. People have real problems and they have real problems that they need to solve. And it usually is much bigger than whatever's happening in our small part of the supply chain. So the questions that we need to ask are more about, what is the impact of this? Everybody has late shipments and trucks fall off. Don't ask stupid questions. Ask them what happens when that happens. Who's affected? what is the risk? What is the financial jeopardy? What is the exponential ripple effect? Because that's how we twist the knife and we create and identify a problem worth solving, which leads us to number 4, provide a unique solution. Find the problem, solve it, and tell the customer why you are the best person to do. And the way that we do that is by being the expert in that one thing. People will often, we've all run into that customer who will bitch about their current provider for an hour and a half straight and then not change. We got to find the problem that's worth solving, and we got to show them how solving that problem will also solve the bigger problem, why it's a solution worth having, which then leads us to the next thing. Because a lot of us get so excited. We identify the prospect, we qualify them, and we go right to close. We might even win that first shipment, and then we never hear from them again. And the reasons are is because we didn't talk to the right person, we didn't sell them a problem that we could solve, and we looked at closing as the end of the relationship. In this business and transportation, the first shipment is day one. All right. They're not signing a contract. Or even if they are, this is the beginning of something. This is where the selling goes. This is where the relationship goes. You everybody talk online. This business is all about relationships. And I'm like, you talk to this guy for 6 minutes. The relationship happens after the first shipment and throughout that relationship.
And you use the term in here, unique solution. You're providing a unique solution. And one of the challenges in a lot of the business we're talking about, which is transportation, logistics, warehousing, and all the associated technologies, a lot of times there's lots of solutions. And especially if you're talking over the road or transportation, sometimes it is commoditized. And I think when it's commoditized, it means you have to find a way to add additional value. So you can't be put on a list with 20 other players on an Excel spreadsheet. And they say, Nick's solution is no better than Joe's solution, no better than Tom's solution, no better than Becky's solution.
We'll add you to our list.
We need to avoid being commodities. And I think a lot of times you can figure out a way to get out of the commodity pricing if you can provide something that they need that they aren't currently having, no one else is offering. And that's not easy. But it could be something like, God, we have these 2 other fields that we can't put in their TMS. And you go, oh, we will add those fields to our TMS. It's a little thing, but it's the difference between somebody saying you're no longer a commodity pricer at that point.
Yeah, what is the impact you're making to my business? How are you helping me run it?
And I say it all the time, Nick. I said it to you the other day when we were talking about this, is when we were young, coffee was commodity. Coffee cost $0.25, 50 cents, whatever it cost at that time. No one would pay a premium for coffee. Now the leaders in the coffee business are premium coffee providers. When I was a kid, when you were a kid, there was phones on the wall, phones on the desk. There was no mobile phones. And it was, I don't even know if you got to pick. You might just get to pick a color. Phones just showed up. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't interesting. It was the ultimate commodity. And now the leader in phones, arguably Apple, it's a sexy purchase. People love buying phones. So even though we are oftentimes put in a commodity bucket, it's our job as salespeople and as go-to-market people to get us out of the commodity bucket. And by the way, this is not everybody's job every single day, but if you can do that once in your career, that's a game changer.
100%.
And a lot of it, I believe, comes back to this understanding the problem and maybe understanding the problem in a deeper way. So if they say, oh, I wish I could have this. Whoa, can we add that? Can we do that? Because sometimes, and again, I think about when I was at a 3PL, sometimes there's something that the finance group goes, I wish the 3PL would give us this instead of this. And you're like, we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about differentiators too, I remember way back even in the DHL days, I had this prospect who was using UPS, and she liked everything we had to sell. But then she was like, oh, I don't like how this is on the website. I'm like, okay. And we fixed all these other problems. Like people will use that one little thing as an excuse to not move when you haven't solved a problem. And I'm like, that's okay. That is what you're giving up for all these other improvements. And she said, okay, yeah. There has to be something deeper involved in there. Plus, that's how you create customers, not shipments. You want to move fast in 2025, don't lose business. But don't keep it by just lowering your price and begging people for give more value, give more information, become unfireable. Do not be a commodity. And tell you what, if you want to avoid being commodity, don't sell that way. Don't play that game. When someone says, great, we'll add you to our list, don't do it. Simply don't do it. Fight for the conversation that you have to offer.
I would never, if somebody said, I'm going to send you an Excel spreadsheet for this week's shipments, I always say, no, don't send us that. And it's funny because they're oftentimes surprised. And I said, I'm not going to save you $50 on tomorrow's shipment. I want to save you 5% and improve your service over the course of a year. And that's deeper than that. And by the way, some people are not interested in that. They're interested in, basically they're saying, I want a one night stand. And I'm saying, no, I want a relationship. And it's okay, that's fine. You have to move on. And I think sometimes when we're not being good salespeople, and we all are guilty of it, we want this big customer, even though we know they're not going to change for us, we think they might change for us. And I think if you have lots and lots of options, you don't have to compromise. So I think as a sales guy, they don't want to play the game the way we want to play. Move on. Go find somebody else. Nick, I am going to summarize all what we talked about, and then I want to get your final thoughts on the topic. So I'm talking to my friend, Nick Klingensmith. We're talking about the logistics of success, a mindset for unstoppable growth. And the first thing we talked about is this whole idea of it's a new year. A lot of us are setting goals, but just recognize that you might need to rethink how you're setting goals. And some are doing great, some are not. I think I'm big into the quarterly goals, but I think you can't do what you did last year and say, I'm just going to do it harder and we're going to do it better. You have to use some of the levers. And we talked about some of those levers. And these aren't the only ones. But there's a lot of ways today that we can do one-to-many, the podcasting, videos, email marketing, emails through our CRM, social media, LinkedIn, lots and lots of ways, tools and levers that we should be using. And I think you also need a plan. And I'm a big believer in accountability partner. Again, Nick's my accountability partner when it comes to the sales side. Next, we talked about personal branding, share on LinkedIn. And I think a big part of personal branding should be you're an expert. You should be an expert in the problems your customers have. And that's really also finding a niche. Don't say I am the perfect solution for all transportation problems. You aren't. So become that cold chain expert, that retail expert. And again, increasingly, we're talking technology guys. Whatever the niche is, be the expert in that niche. And I think that's also a lot of the technology guys would probably say, I don't come from this business. You have to become an expert in the business. And I think that's really important. And I think the way you're going to create content, it should be based around that expertise. Last but not least, we talked about the blocking and tackling, the fundamentals, and you gave us 5 points. And these should not be new to any of us. Number one is identify your prospect. That's not just the business, but also the position. Qualify that prospect. Make sure they have budget. Make sure they're actually the decision maker. Next, we need to do a needs investigation / assessment, see where they're at. You got to actually listen and find those little things that potentially we can make in sale on. Next, we talked about unique solutions, provide those solutions that make sense. Last but not least, we talked about closing, and in your words, the closing is not the closing. It is just the beginning. It's the opening. Put a big old bow on this one, Nick Klingensmith.
There's nothing that we talked about today that probably was shocking to anybody. As a matter of fact, most people listening probably, yeah, I know I got to start that. Oh, I know I got to do that. I know I got to do that. So here's my finishing for you. Let this be the time. Let this be the time that we say, you know what? You're right. I am going to do something different, and I'm going to start today. Let this be the time that you try that new technology, that you try that new system, that you get on that podcast, that you start that podcast, that you share that podcast. Let this be the time that you take a chance in pushing out content that might suck. Let this be the time.
Oh, it will suck to start.
Yeah, 100%. Let this be the time that you ratchet up expectations. If you're a W-2 employee working for somebody who gave you a goal, screw that goal, set a bigger goal. believe more for yourself, demand more from yourself, expect more from yourself. Let this be the time that we get after it and redefine that baseline.
Yep. Nick, I'll be a salesman for you for a minute. This is why people like me hire people like Nick. And I'm a big believer in getting coaches. And somebody say, oh, I don't have the money. Yeah, you don't have the money because you don't have the sales or you don't have the success that you want. And then it's an investment in your future. And I've worked with Ann Holm for many years and I continue to. Working with Nick, the reason I'm working with him this quarter is because it is going to get me sales that I wouldn't otherwise have. And it's just that simple. If you're working with a coach who's not getting you new sales, then stop working with them. That's what it comes down to. But in a lot of ways, when I talk to Nick and I say, hey, here's my plan to get there. And even as I'm saying it, I realize, oh, that's not going to get me there. And then Nick points it out too. And I think that's why we need coaches. And I know there's a lot of bosses out there and other accountability partners. But again, big reason people are using companies like yours, Nick.
Well, I appreciate it. And I have my coach. They have a coach. Tom Brady has a coach. So you have a coach.
Exactly. So what conference will we see you at this year?
I'm eyeballing BCS. I really wanted to eyeball Manifest, but that's coming up pretty quick. And F3 is definitely in the radar.
I'll be a Manifest. Come on, Nick. You got to get to Manifest. I
know. Ever since you were the one who put it on my radar in the first place. And what am I going to do different this year? That's something I hope to do different this year.
And you said BCS, that's the Broker Carrier Summit.
Correct. Yep.
You told me there's one in Indianapolis in
April 28th.
Okay. And did you say there's another one?
I believe in October, and I don't have the location for that one off the top of my head.
It's January. We'll figure it out I'll see if I can't get Dan Lindsay to come on and talk about the Broker Carrier Summit.
Oh, I bet he'd love to. That would be awesome.
What other conferences you say you're going to?
I also eyeball on F3, and anybody who might want to have me come fire up the crowd.
All right. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Anyone who's listening who says, hey, I would love to have you at our conference or our sales summit or whatever else, Nick is available and a great speaker. Anyway, enough of my blather. I'll make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to your website, a link to your book, and any other links you and your marketing. By the way, we didn't talk about your book too much. What is your book and when did you publish it?
We'll mention on this one, we'll talk about Selling Inspired, which is the book I published in July. It is a mental endurance guide for enduring sales performance. It's not a sales book. It's a book for salespeople. It's a book on sales mindset and acquiring the mental endurance required for a career in sales.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you, Joe.
Always a pleasure talking to you. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support is very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward.
You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.